Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 12th of September, comes to you from London. And the dollar index has been climbing the last couple of days, so we're back into bullish territory on all three time frames with good upside targets here. In fact, upside targets on the index to 103, and so that's about 5% higher. So it does look like the dollar will just keep pushing to new highs. We're seeing the Eurodollar therefore weakening against the dollar, and we've got downside targets here, some 2% lower. Looking at the yen, we see the dollar really has been climbing all week really, and that was heads up for the turnaround because it tends to be a lead indicator. And sterling sitting at 123, so sterling's actually holding some strength against that stronger dollar as well. Against the euro, sterling sitting at 111, it's actually also looking a bit stronger there, and against the Swiss franc, holding on to this 122 level, a bit flatter there, but still short-term sterling looking quite strong, but medium and long term, of course, still some degree of weakness. Bitcoin actually sitting at $10,000, just holding on to the $10,000 level, but we are short-term bearish. We've got downside targets here, nothing major, although the longer-term downside targets are quite substantial. But we need to wait for this break of support, and obviously $10,000 is a pretty key level. Looking at the S&P 500 index, we're up sharply yesterday. Trump announcing a delay in Chinese tariffs helping markets, and so we are seeing the S&P climbing higher and starting to look like it could break to new highs again. So looking stronger. The same with the NatGas. We're starting to look strong here as well. Of course, we're not until we break to new highs. We can't be sure that we won't get a further breakdown, but at the moment it's starting to look more positive on the upside. Looking at the Dow, that was up 0.85% overnight. We are much closer to breaking to new highs here, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And the Russell 2000 has been the laggard, but actually really catching up this last few days. So back into medium-term bullish territory for the first time in some weeks, so that's quite interesting. Looking at the S&P future, we're up slightly this morning, and the Nasdaq E-mini is up 1/3%, so it does suggest that the US market will open a touch higher. Looking at the UK market, we're up 0.1% this morning, bullish on the short-term charts, still have work to do on the medium and long-term charts, and the same on the 250. We're actually looking much better on the 250 than we are on the blue chip 100 index. So actually starting to look like we will break to 12-month highs, which would be very good for the index. We've got a little bit more work to do just on the long-term chart, but the medium-term chart and short-term chart just marching steadily up the hill. You can see here the performance on Midcaps in the UK has been really quite good the last several weeks. Looking at the DAX, we're also breaking into medium-term bullish here, and the CAC Courant also looking better. So generally speaking, we are seeing these indices all looking a lot better. Japan also back into medium-term bullish territory. Hong Kong down slightly overnight, but short-term bullish, medium-term and long-term still has more work to do. And the Chinese market up 0.75%. That delay in tariffs helping there, and we are on the verge of going back into medium-term bullish. The Sensex in India is lower. It's higher this morning, but has actually been struggling compared to other indices, but we're just starting to see some improvement there. And the Aussie market up a further 0.25%. At no time has the Aussie market looked bearish on the short and medium term chart, the medium and long term chart, so still holding on and looking good. Crude oil sitting at $61 for Brent crude. Just starting to look a little bit more bearish on the short-term chart. We do have a downside target here. If we fall back below this $60 mark, we would activate that, and that's based on that fall off that we saw yesterday. So Brent crude actually just looking a little bit weaker. Medium and long term still pretty weak as well. And WTI, of course, similar picture here. We already are in the short-term bearish mode here. US NatGas holding on to $2.54, so it's been looking quite strong, holding on to that short-term trend, and the medium-term trend is now clearly bullish. Gold is back up this morning above the $1,500 mark, not enough to turn the yellow metal bullish, but it's starting to look like it will turn. And silver also up this morning, but again not enough to take us into short-term bullish. US 10-year yield sitting at 1.7%, so we've seen a real surge in yields over the last week. Really, since the non-farm payroll numbers last week, we've seen a real surge in US bond yields. So we're sitting at 1.7%, and it looks like 1.5% may well have been near the bottom. Taking a look at the German bond, the Bund, we are actually weaker here, so we're seeing that yields, that sell-off in bond prices is quite key. Waiting for the ECB announcement today on interest rates, so it could create quite a lot of volatility in the Bund, so keep an eye on that. Taking a quick look at the stocks now, as we said yesterday, mostly up. We see a sea of green here. Boeing actually were the best performer in the Dow. They were up 3.6%. Apple also looking better there as well. Apple actually bullish now on the charts and breaking to 12-month highs, so looking pretty good there. Outperforming the Dow Jones Index by 20% this year, so it's still pretty good. And Boeing actually up that 3%, really taking them into bullish territory. The trend's still holding on, despite the 737 MAX situation. Boeing actually holding on quite well. IBM were the worst performer, but the stock is actually medium-term bullish as well. Not a fairly flat performance against the Dow this year. Taking a look at the Nasdaq, of course we said Apple was one of the best performers there. Tesla actually up 5%, so that was quite a turnaround for them, and they're starting to look medium-term bullish again. A bit of a recovery, but the long-term chart is still pretty bearish. On the downside, we had Take-Two Interactive. They were down 4.5%. Trend is still pretty good, and they've outperformed the Dow by over 10% this year, but we are just seeing some pressure coming in there. In the Aussie market, we had Southern Cross Media. They were up 4.9%, so looking pretty good there. On the downside, we've got Nanosonics Limited. They were down 5%, so not looking so good there. Chinese stocks were mostly up, as we saw, and the Indian market was a bit more of a mixed picture. Indiabulls Housing, they were up 5%, not enough to change the chart. Pretty dire looking chart there. And Yes Bank, often in the laggards, also still a terrible looking chart. Tata Motors down 3.8%. Their chart looking lower as well. This data all coming from Yahoo Finance, by the way. Taking a look now at the top 100 in the UK market. So we have W. Morrison there, the best performer, up 3.2% this morning. That chart's still looking pretty grim though. Glencore up 1.8%. And again, not a great looking chart. Anglo-American also performing quite well. And BAT's making an announcement this morning on job cuts, which people see that cost cutting as an improvement, but actually the chart actually still holding on there in the medium term, but long term has work to do. Most of the resource stocks are up this morning, the leaders board. Whitbread, the worst performer, down 2.8%. Intercontinental Hotels Group down 2.5%. So hotels groups struggling there. We see also the banks struggling this morning. Lloyd's Group, Standard Chartered, Barclays, etc. Taking a look at the 250, we were mentioning how this index looking a lot better. We've got 2i Fluid Systems, they're up 4.3% this morning. Not enough to change the chart there. Into Properties up 3%, again not enough to change the chart. If we look at the downside, we've got Metro Bank, they're down a massive 7% this morning. Their woes continue. CYBG also heading lower, so we still do have some pretty big fallers here in the 250. Looking to Europe now, the best performer is InBev, the brewer in Belgium this morning. Their chart looking stronger and starting to turn into medium-term bullish. On the downside, we've got Total. We noticed that BP were down quite heavily in the UK. Total down as well this morning. That chart's still struggling on the medium and long-term charts, and underperforming the Dow Jones quite significant this year, down by 12%. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.